Let us begin Chapter 9, which deals with cellular respiration. So how do cells harvest chemical energy? We talked about in the last chapter this idea of photosynthesis, creating these glucose molecules because they can store a lot of energy. So how do we use those glucose molecules then to get energy for the processes that the cells in our body need? Cellular respiration is the process by which the energy is harvested by cells from the sugar. It requires oxygen, releases carbon dioxide, water, and a large amount of ATP. So again, we talked about the energy currency. ATP is really our energy kind of currency in the cells. And all of our cells are going to harvest chemical energy, and we get that from food. So whether it's from the plants that we eat, other animals, etc. So the big idea in cellular respiration is now breaking down these higher energy glucose molecules into ATP. So a cell uses the energy to build and maintain its structure, transfer materials, manufacture products, Cells need a ton of energy, and cellular respiration is going to provide it to them by breaking down mainly sugars. There can be other organic compounds, but typically for the purpose of this class, we're just going to focus on sugars, and in particular glucose. Our bodies require a continuous supply of energy just to stay alive. So we think about our little pup here. Organisms use energy from ATP for a ton of different activities. Breathing, heart pumping, maintaining body temperature, thinking, dreaming. So much energy is required to keep the cells functioning. Organisms use energy from ATP for all its activities. So above and beyond the energy we need for body maintenance, cellular respiration provides energy for voluntary activities, such as walking, running, jumping, doing different types of activities that are more voluntary, so not the involuntary activities. The amount of energy it takes to perform these activities are expressed as kilocalories. So a calorie on a nutritional label, often depicted by the big C, is actually 1 kilocalorie, so 1,000 calories. And a kilocalorie is the quantity of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degrees Celsius. All right, what does that mean? All right, when we think about energy and the energy needs of our body, we'll take, for instance, energy consumed by various activities. So how much energy is required for us to do certain things? Running, like you'd be running away from this class, possibly 979 kilocalories consumed per hour. Dancing, maybe after the semester final, maybe when you figured out, oh, Miss Mannion isn't going to be my teacher next year or next semester, 510. Bicycling, 490. Swimming in the sea of knowledge, 408. Walking, just going to different lab classes, classes in general, 245, and just sitting there and absorbing everything that you're doing in class, 28 kilocalories. So not a ton per se for just sitting there, but your body requires a lot of kilocalories and energy to get going. So how do we as organisms and other cells convert these calories from food into energy that the body can use? So we tap into this energy because, a reminder from chapter 2.4, energy is contained in an arrangement of electrons and chemical bonds. So the bonds are the key. And potentially when we break bonds, there's going to be this release of energy. And this is what we're going to do to glucose. We're going to break some of those bonds, form a couple of different things, and that's where we get the energy from. So cellular respiration is really the process that releases this energy by breaking down glucose and other food molecules in the presence of oxygen. In just a minute, I'll show you the formula for cellular respiration. We can see where all of these pieces kind of fit in. But the big piece for here that we're going to kind of start is during this process, ADP is converted to ATP. And this is a continuous process to allow the cell and the organism to continue to use energy at kind of a constant rate. All right, cellular respiration. So again, hopefully for many of you, you look at this and you say, wait a minute, isn't this just the reverse of photosynthesis? Yeah, basically. And just like we kind of simplified photosynthesis, we're going to do the same with cellular respiration, but go into a little bit more detail for some of the specific reactions that are taking place. Cellular respiration occurs in 3 stages. You have glycolysis, citric acid cycle, which is often called the Krebs cycle, after the gentleman that found it, and the electron transport chain. All of these steps are going to occur in and around the mitochondria and eukaryotic cells, and in the plasma membrane and cytoplasm in prokaryotes. So we're going to look at a little diagram of where all this happens. Alright, if we look at our handy dandy chart here, glycolysis is actually going to start off in the cytoplasm, and then you're going to have your citric acid cycle, also your Krebs cycle, that is going to take place within the mitochondria, and the electron transport chain is also going to occur in the mitochondria. So kind of similar to photosynthesis in the fact that when we looked at the chloroplast where things were taking place within that, same occurs for this. So my suggestion would be is to make sure that you have a copy of this and understanding where things are at. I'm going to ask you later to kind of make a little bit of a study guide for yourself, but this would be something definitely that you want to make sure that you have. Okay, so for the 9.1, we're really going to focus on glycolysis and a different pathway that can occur after glycolysis. So we talked about there is the 3 steps. Glycolysis is always the first step in cellular respiration. So in 9.2 we will cover the other 2 steps, but for the rest of this section we're going to focus on glycolysis and another pathway. So when you think about glycolysis, if we were to break this down, it literally means the splitting of sugar. So lysis, splitting, glyco, the sugar. So glycolysis begins with a molecule of glucose, which is that 6-carbon sugar, and ends with 2 molecules of pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound. It does require an initial input of 2 ATP molecules. So remember when we talked about activation energy in chapter 2? Kind of think of it like that. We need a little bit of energy to get started for this. But as you'll see later on, we get a lot more out of it than this initial 2 ATP that we have to put into it. So the formula for this is glucose plus 2 ATP, and you're going to end up with, I don't know why I lost my arrow there, but 2 pyruvate, which is basically an ionized form of pyruvic acid. Glycolysis is a multi-step pathway which utilizes 6 different enzymes in a metabolic pathway that is anaerobic. And again, when we talked about kind of simplifying cellular respiration, I'm not going to ask you to memorize all of the different enzymes that are involved. Just know that there's a bunch of stuff kind of going on, and we're going to highlight the key things. It is anaerobic in the sense of without air. So it doesn't need air or oxygen. If we go back to the formula for cellular respiration, oxygen is involved with it, but for the glycolysis portion of it, we do not need it quite yet. So we're just going to start with that sugar. In later stages of molecule, 4 ATP molecules are produced, basically, so you have a net gain of 2 ATP. So in glycolysis, you end up with 2 pyruvate plus 2 ATP, and you also end up with 2 NADH. If you kind of remember something about NADP plus, NADPH from photosynthesis, same type of thing happening here in cellular respiration and specifically glycolysis. We have this kind of like an electron carrier, NAD plus, which is going to accept these high energy electrons to form 2 NADH. And we need these because it allows the process of glycolysis to continue. So I'm going to add the 2 NADH for here. So this is kind of your big thing for what's going into glycolysis and what you're going to end up getting for that. The chemical energy stored in the bonds of glucose molecule is used to form the high energy compounds ATP. So again, just reiterating that we need this ATP. That's where we're going to get the energy from. And it's universal among organisms. Simpler organisms, yeast, bacteria, they can actually satisfy their metabolic needs with ATP produced by glycolysis alone. So there's something, some organisms that they get to glycolysis and that's going to be enough for them. However, most organisms have a far higher energy demands and must undergo additional stages of cellular respiration to release more energy. So in the next video lessons, we're going to talk about what are some of these other pathways, what happens when we have oxygen involved, what happens when there's not oxygen involved. But glycolysis is the first step getting the sequence going. It does require 2 ATP molecules to start everything off, but you end up with 2 more ATP molecules and your other materials.